Well, this is the beginning of a new project, a new course actually that I'm giving called Developing a Motif, and I'm offering it to intermediate and advanced watercolorists who are interested in taking another step in the development of their career. And what it involves is taking a motif. You can see I'm interested in doing a project based on the barges along the Seine. I visited Paris last year and on several occasions got to sit by the river and study the Seine. This is one watercolor that came out of those studies, facing Pont Neuf and drawing the barges along the Seine. The project or the course is asking artists to choose a motif and develop it over the course of several or more paintings. And you'll see as we move through this series that I'm using this particular motif and developing it in several directions, using the same sorts of elements. It might be a different bridge or a different view of the bridge, but the point is to stay with one subject and become very, very familiar with the elements that you're painting. This is different because in a lot of the courses I teach or other artists teach, we're moving from subject to subject each week, and we don't have the opportunity to really invest time and ourselves into a project like this. But if you're a working artist and have developed your painting, this is one step that you want to take. You'll see the benefits as we move through the projects. In this first painting, I'm back at the studio now developing this painting of Pont Neuf and the barges in front. I'm starting with washes of yellow ochre and a little bit of burnt sienna. I'm using a brush at this stage and not doing any drawing on the paper. I've found through practice that I prefer this method. I know it's not for everybody, but I find that I gain a little more fluidity and oftentimes more accuracy in representing the larger elements, or you can even extend that and say sort of the abstract underpainting of the scene. Abstract in this case means setting the shapes, the flat shapes. They don't have any true dimension yet, but you can see in these silhouettes of the city behind, the bridge, the barges, the ground running towards the bridge. The shapes are rather accurate, and they allow me to focus on their relationship if I work with the brush. Also, I encounter things along the way, little, sometimes accidentals, sometimes passages that I make with the brush that inspire development along a different line or something of that nature, which I'll point out as we move into it. And another benefit that I find is when I'm using a pencil, when I draw in the architecture or the bridge, I feel a little encumbered to kind of follow the lines that I make, whereas with the brush, I don't mind restating some of these passages as you'll see, and for greater effect or for accuracy or for whatever. This wash now that I'm moving into is developing the large midtone, or the buildings, which I am setting as a midtone in this painting. That midtone is going to be carried from left to right, but you notice I'm making a change. As it gets lower, it gets a little warmer and darker. As it comes closer to us, it's getting darker still. So I'm thinking of this wash as a graded wash. In other words, it's changing from top to bottom, from left to right. That change, when it dries, when it cures, is going to give the effect of depth. It's going to give the effect of light bounce and just make the wash more interesting than if I had painted it as a solid color. my intention is to connect this wash to the wash of the bridge so that they almost seem, the bridge almost seems to be an extension of the city. This, I feel, can work as a background element. I might not do this if it were an element in the foreground or midground, as it might confuse rather than recede the way I'm tending it to. Any case, in this case, I'm making an effort to use the same two colors, an ultramarine blue and a burnt sienna, and connect that back stretch of buildings to the bridge. There is a highlight that I'm leaving at the top of the bridge. That's an important highlight, and it will remain a part of the bridge all the way through the painting and have an important role in the final piece. So now I'm connecting these arches to the water and suggesting, the looking through the bridge a little more. And while I'm thinking of the shape, it's still a very flat shape. I am trying to give a little depth of color to the lower part of the bridge, and especially where you see an archway or you see the shadow extend itself onto the river, I'm adding a little bit more blue there. And now painting the Seine itself, the water of the Seine, shifting to a little bit of more blue pigment, a little lighter, and using this as an opportunity to carve out some of the brighter elements on the barges, the canopy or the rooftops or this sort of thing. So look at the unity of this one shape. That was very intentional, and I feel I've set up the painting in a good way. I'm now moving to a deeper element, which are these dappled shadows coming from trees above that scoot along the walkway that goes along the Seine, even under the Pont Neuf in one instance, as you can see in the distance. It's dappled sunlight, so I'm leaving some gaps and making some brush strokes to give it an interesting feel that's reflective of the trees overhead. And I'm making this not only darker but brighter. I'm using a more pure ultramarine blue, and that'll become especially evident as the painting dries. You may now wonder, what's he doing with these blobs, these vertical blobs? And I'm simply touching the paper with a good-sized round brush to indicate figures. These are figures moving through the shadows. And at this stage, it's true, they're really nothing more than blobs, but their position is important. As I'm at an elevation, I want them to appear to be receding in the background. And I chose this method to work with the shadow and not paint them as figures so much as an extension of these shadows. Later on, I'll define them a little more clearly, introduce some bright colors, but at this stage, I felt it important to keep them connected with the shadow. Okay, we're getting into some fine brushwork, and I'm trying very hard. This is a concentrated process where I'm focusing on the bright shapes, but I'm drawing the canopy with the brush, and I'm trying to be very calligraphic. In other words, make my brush strokes count and leave a lot of highlights, which I can keep, or I can later color, or I can even leave white if it works for the painting. These highlights represent the edges of the barge, or lines that are coming off the barge, or windows, or pieces of canopy, or this and that. They're planes that are generally getting a little more light, and so leaving them white at this stage is a good idea. I'm using a very strong dark here, a lot of the ultramarine blue, a little bit of burnt sienna, maybe a little bit of neutral tint. And the painting is sort of assuming a finished quality. You can feel atmosphere in the background, and you can feel sharp light and focus in the midground, especially where those figures are. That's my focal point. That's where I'm kind of I'm focusing all these other elements on that area. So I'm not, even though my eyes or the photograph reveals a lot of detail in the background and a lot of fun things, fun things for the painter. I'd love to be drawing each window and each balustrade, but I'm careful about that so that I maintain a clear idea in the midground where my figures are. And the other elements that I add going across the painting will also focus on that. Now I'm entering the bridge with that same blue, ultramarine blue with a bit of burnt sienna, and I'm painting the distinctive architecture of Pont Neuf. It has these rounded extensions on the bridge. The bridge is rather thick. There's some fencing along the bridge, different things like that I want to allude to at least a little bit. And you see me doing that now with a darker blue. I had this intention, even when I was doing that first wash, that I would later come in with dry brush and pick up the architectural elements. This way the paint doesn't move. I can control it a little more and grab those details. I can very much control how strong to make them or how weak to make them. And I'm cautious to make them too strong. I want them to recede against the midground, especially where my figures are. But at the same time, to present a little bit of that beautiful aspect they have and the quality that they give this part of Paris. I do the same along the rooftops, and I'm leaving that kind of area above the bridge rather smoky and undefined. Later on, I'm going to put some elements on top of that. So I want to leave it rather vague back there. And I'm connecting this darker tone using the river as a vehicle. Of course, there's a strong shadow underneath the bridge. I'm actually not painting it as strong as it appears in the photograph or as strong as it appears in life, because those areas, especially under the bridge, can really dominate a painting if you paint it as dark as you see it. I want to leave my strong darks where they're going to be more effective in this midground. And you can see how that has tied the painting together a little bit. It's taken the foreground and the background and actually I've bridged those two areas with this darker color. And I've also, in the same time, given a texture to the water. I've left some of those lighter blues to show waves or ripples in the water. So all of these brushstrokes have a point, have a purpose. Now what you see me doing, it's hard to perceive, but I'm shading those left areas that were on the barge, adding a bit of red or a little bit of green or a little color here and there so that I, again, get more attention around my figures. These left areas were a little too bright. I'm toning them down, making it a little more festive. And returning to the barge also to add some darks or make some adjustments, pick up some windows here and there, adding a bit of detail in that central area. I'm late to report on this, but this tree has an important aspect too. Not only does it create the beautiful shadows that we see, and it pays the painter to allude to this in some way, but it also shores up that upper right corner. If you scroll back and look at the painting prior to this tree, you'll see the attention was sort of leaking out of that upper corner. Now, with this dark in the corner, I have kind of refocused the attention on those figures in the center of the painting. All of these details and shadings, and now the leaves and tree, I feel are refocusing viewer's attention where I want it to be. You see I put some red now into some of the figures. I've put the strong masts against the lighter part of the background so that it really pushes back and the background recedes nicely in contrast to these masts. And the painting is assuming a finished look. I won't be doing too much more, some adjustments. I'm going to put some whites in, which I feel will are necessary in certain parts. If I overpaint a white, there's some border color on this barge that will look good if I put a white there. Whites on the shoulders of these figures, especially the ones moving through the shadows, helps to set them off a little bit and make the scene feel more luminous. So, not too much more to be done to this painting. And I feel it's a good first step into the series. I've acquired a few ideas in doing this painting that I think may work in a second version. And I'm anxious, even as I'm finishing this painting, I'm thinking how to extend this, or thinking about those little clues that I got in this painting that will help me create a variation or help me to perhaps make this painting stronger in some way. And so that will be my next work in this series. I'm going to use the same basic perspective, but I'm going to do things a little differently. As this dries, the color becomes a little more transparent, and you can see how those details function now. They function softly on the bridge and in the background, and they function with a great deal of clarity in the barge. And the light that's coming through is what I was seeking. I wanted it to be almost a blinding light near the figures. That blue transparent shadow has dried lighter, so we feel some transparency in the shadow. The spacing of the figures was good. One dangerous part of putting groups in is we tend to put them in pairs and equal spacings and equal distances. It's really important for the artist to look for ways to create variety, and you can do that when you're spacing these figures or grouping them. Think about variety and look for variety. Not too many details. In some cases we see a shoulder, we see a head, but they remain pretty much indefinable blobs, dark blobs in those shadows. And personally, I like that. I like that quality. I don't want them to be too well defined. And that's about it for this piece. So look for the next one. Thank you.